Edit.
Hi everyone and welcome back. I'm Professor Lindsay, and in this video we're extending our previous discussion of triad qualities to dive into the world of seventh chords. A seventh chord is like a triad, but instead of a 3-note chord, it's a 4-note chord, and it's going to be built from 3 stacked thirds. Essentially, it's a triad with an extra third above the chordal fifth. Before we dive into these details, remember, this topic is going to build directly on what we learned about triads in video number 8. So if you're comfortable with building and inverting triads and assigning Roman numerals to them, you'll find this topic manageable. It's just an extension of what you already know. So let's start with the various seventh chord qualities by taking different triads and adding thirds on top of them. In most cases, we're going to combine the triad quality plus the specific seventh interval above the root in the name for each one of these. You'll see what I mean as we dive into it. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the fully diminished seventh. This is when we have a diminished triad on the bottom with a diminished seventh on top. The other type of diminished triad I want to talk about is the half diminished seventh. So that's when we have a diminished triad on the bottom, but a minor seventh on top. We will demarcate this with a diminished symbol with a slash through it. Also, we have the minor minor 7. In those two minors, the first one refers to the minor triad on the bottom, and then the minor 7 on top is the minor 7. Sometimes we just refer to this as the minor 7th chord. The minor triad with a major 7th on top. The minor major 7th doesn't pop up very much in the classical style, but this is like the James Bond chord. It's a pretty cool vibey chord. It's going to pop up an awful lot in the repertoire is the major minor 7. Most times you're going to be seeing this as a dominant 7th triad, such as the 5 chord in the major key. We just have our 5 chord on the dominant, scale degree 5, 7, and 2. You add that scale degree 4 in there, and we get some really strong chromatic resolution of both tendency tones of 4 wanting to resolve down to 3, and 7 wanting to resolve up to 1. So that's kind of as crunchy as it gets in the major mode. We also have major triads with a major 7th, the major 7 chord. And this is just kind of a fun chord that creates some really like alleviation of tonal gravity. It's kind of a great chord that pops up. So like our exploration of what chord qualities were on which scale degree in a key, let's add a diatonic meaning of the scale in the key, a diatonic 7th atop of all the triads that we built on each scale degree. So using C major as an example, our 1 chord and the 4 chord are going to have major 7 or just major 7. 3 of them are going to have minor 7th chords. So that is a minor triad with a minor 7th. One of these is going to be a half diminished 7 chord. And then our 5 chord is where the most oftentimes we will see a dominant 7th, the major minor 7th. In minor keys, using a C minor scale, we'll have minor 7 chords, so minor triad with a minor 7th appearing on scale degrees 1 and 4. We'll have a major 7th chord on scale degrees 3 and 6, a half diminished 7 on 2, and a dominant 7th on the subtonic, so 7 in natural minor, or fully diminished 7 on our leading tone, raised 7. And notice the dominant 7 chords are always going to use the raised leading tone in both major and minor keys, as is the case in much of their classical repertoire. So there are 2 things I want you to be able to do with this information. Number 1 is identifying the quality of a 7th chord, and the other is being able to realize the notes of a provided chord on a staff. So I'll walk you through an example of each, then I want you to try and attempt the others on your own, pausing the video before going on. So for the first one, I have here a C 7th chord. I have E flat and B flat in the mix. How do we figure out what kind of chord this is? So first, let's analyze what is the bottom triad. So C, E flat, and G is a minor triad. Next, analyze the type of 7th. So C to B flat is a minor 7th. This makes a minor 7 chord, or shortened in many cases just to a minor 7. So if I were to label this, I would just say lowercase m for minor and then a superscript 7. And then next, if I wrote down a chord symbol, if I said G major 7, what does this mean? I want this to be a major 7 is a lot of times a shorthand for a major 7 chord. So I'm looking for a major triad on the bottom. Let's build this on G, followed by a major 7th above the root of G. So G, a major 7th above, is an F sharp. That is in fact our G major 7 triad. So see if you can do the rest of these before moving on. So coming back into it, I have a 7th chord where the root is D, and I see an F sharp in the mix. The bottom triad here of D, F sharp, and A is a major chord. D to C is a minor 7. So a major minor 7 or dominant 7 is sometimes you will see. I'll accept both. So capital M, lowercase m7, or we could write dom 7 for a dominant 7th, as that's the case of where we'd likely see a major minor 7 chord. The next example is the 7th chord built on E, and I see a G sharp and a D sharp. So again, what do we have here? The bottom triad is a major chord. E, G sharp, and B is major. E to D sharp, that's a major 7th. So this is a major 7, or just a major 7 chord. And then the next example is a 7th chord built on F, where we have E flat on top. So that is a major triad on the bottom and a minor 7th on top. You can call this a major minor 7 or a dominant 7. In the case of the remaining chords over here, I said an F sharp 7 chord. So in commercial chord symbols, if you just have the letters with a 7 after it, the implication is dominant 7 or major minor 7 chord. So F sharp 7 is going to mean a F sharp major triad. So let's build that. F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, and then we need a minor 7 on top. F sharp, minor 7 above is an E natural. For the next example, we have an E circle 7. So that is an E fully diminished 7 chord. So let's build a diminished triad on E, that is E, G, B flat. And then we need a diminished 7 above E. So go ahead and get our generic 7th in there. So E to D. And that is in fact a whole step away from a full octave. That's a minor 7. We need to lower this again, making that a D flat. So an E fully diminished 7 chord is going to be a 7th built on E with B flat and D flat in it. And then lastly, I want an A circle with a slash through it, 7. Remember that 0 with a slash means half diminished. And half diminished is diminished triad minor 7 on top. So a diminished triad on A is A, C, E flat. That's diminished. Now I need a minor 7 on top. A to G is a minor 7. So like the figured bass symbols of 5/3 or 6/3 or 6/4 to indicate whether a chord is in root position or in an inversion, we're going to use the same principles for inverting 7th chords. Now, because we have an additional note, that means there's going to be additional inversions. So as before, a root position triad is going to have the figure of 7/5/3, because we have a 3rd, a 5th, and a 7th above the bass. Most times you won't see all of those numbers. You'll see this shortened to a 7. And we'll have a full conversation about how figured bass gets abbreviated in just a moment. First inversion triads. This is where we have the chordal 3rd on the bass. We can go ahead and just take a look at it. We have what? We have a 3rd above the bass, we have a 5th above the bass, and a 6th above the bass. Because now that 7th has been reduced to a 2nd. A lot of times you'll see this shortened to a 6/5. You don't see the 3 as part of the figure, but it's there. A second inversion 7th chord is where we have the chordal 5th in the bass. And the figure is a 6th above the bass, 4th above the bass, 3rd above the bass. We'll abbreviate this to just a 4/3 chord. And then a 3rd inversion is where the 7th, this is the most unstable of them all, the 7th is in the bass. It feels like you have a triad and the bass is just starting to wander someplace. It creates a lot of movement and tension. This is where we have a 6th, a 4th, and a 2nd above our root note. We'll be able to just abbreviate this to a 4/2. So the inversions of 7th chords that we have in the mix is 7 for root position, 6/5 for first inversion, 4/3 for second inversion, 4/2 for third inversion. Remember that these figures are just going to refer to generic intervals above the bass, not necessarily the root of the chord. So no symbol is measuring the distance between intervals of the chord. We're just talking about defaulting to notes that are above the bass note that's provided, and we're always defaulting to notes that are in the key signature, unless there's something about the figured bass that's going to tell us otherwise. So let's take a look at how the 7th chords might appear in context. Let's look again back at All of Me, which we explored in an earlier video. We're going to add 7th chords now to the mix. So in this case, for C major 7, we will accompany this with a C, an E, a G, and a B. We can keep it close spacing, just right there in the same range, or we can space this out wherever we want. For the E7, the implication again, if there's no other indication of what type of 7th or what type of quality, this is going to be implying a dominant 7 chord. So E, G sharp, B is our major triad with D on top. Again, we can space this however we like. A7, again, a major minor chord or a dominant chord. That is going to be A, C sharp, E, and G. And then finally, we're just to the D minor, which, as we said before, was just D and F and A. And then next, let's apply Roman numeral analysis to Josephine Lang's Ich liebe dich. This ostensibly appears more complicated than our lead sheet, but trust me, the principles are the same. It looks like we've got a lot of notes here, right? But if we just track where the root, the chordal third, and the chordal fifth are, and seventh, if there's one present, we'll notice that a lot of these notes are repeated between octaves. So I'm going to drop that A in measure 3. It's not part of the prevailing chord, so ignore that one. But let's walk through how do we start to break this down. First of all, I'm looking at the key signature to decide what key we're in. So 2 sharps is going to be D major or B minor. And if I think it's in B minor, that means I'm looking for perhaps a raised leading tone. So A sharp. I see a bunch of A's. I see no A sharps. And it seems to be the root motion starting on D is giving emphasis to D over B. And it's hanging out here, D to F sharp to E to A to D. That motion from the dominant to the tonic is very affirming of D being our home key. Let's take a look at all the notes that are in this chord. I see D, I see F sharp, I see another D, I see another F sharp, and I see an A. So in truth, the notes that we have in this bar are just D, F sharp, and A. If I were to kind of compress this into a closed spaced chord, D in the key of D is a 1 chord. So I'll just say this is a 1, where the root is D, it's a major triad. The next one, I have F sharp, I see a D and an A, followed by another D, another A, another D. So again, this is just hanging out with D, A, and F sharp. Notice this is the same notes that we just had in the previous bar, right? D, F sharp, and A was our 1 chord. The thing of note is that now F sharp's in the bass. So that is what we say is a first inversion triad. I would say this is the 1 chord in first inversion, and we know that we can shorten first inversion triads. Instead of saying 6-3 to indicate first inversion, we could just call it 6. And again, I'll talk about all the abbreviations in the next video as well. For the next chord, if we leave out that A that I said just to ignore for now, E is in the bass. If we were to try and make a triad here, E, there is no G. This has to do with the fact that A is acting as a suspension. We haven't talked about those yet, so just ignore that. But I see that there is a root on E. A chordal fifth of that chord would be a B, and I see a B right there in the middle of the treble clef. Then there's a D as well. That D is a 7th above the E. So I would say this is the 7th chord. That's just lacking the chordal third because that's suspension. But again, don't worry about it for now. An E 7 chord. An E in the key of D is a 2 chord. So let's go ahead and say this is an E7. Finally, we have A. So an A, C sharp, E, and G. That makes a nice triad of just a 7th chord built on A, and the dominant chord built on 7 on our dominant, just going to be a major minor chord or a dominant 7 chord. I would call this a 5-7 chord, followed by a return to D, A, F sharp, A, D, and that's another, just like those 3 notes of our 1 chord. So that is return to 1. So if we were to analyze the Roman numerals of this passage, Ich liebe dich means I love you, and the Roman numerals are 1, 1-6, 2-7, 5-7, and 1. That is giving you a sense of the small art of Roman numeral analyses. So in our next video, we're going to review all the numbers that are used in musical theoretical notation so far, ensuring that we've got clarity before moving on to more advanced topics. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.